one pilot, one helicopter, 250 souls on the edge of death. When the Army grounded all flights, Lieutenant Eva Callahan broke every rule in the book, flying straight into a valley the maps called suicide. The desert mornings always began the same at Camp Valor, just north of Karash in the Eastern Front. Dust curling before sunrise, the turbines whining before the heat hit the steel. But that morning, everything felt off. I remember tightening my gloves, walking the flight line like I always did, touching each blade, each rivet. It wasn't superstition. It was respect. I'd flown this Black Hawk, tail number 27 Alpha, for nearly 3 years, and I believed in treating machines like people. Like they remembered who treated them right. My name is Chief Warrant Officer Liana Torch Miles. I'm 28, 5'4" if you stretch the tape. And if you ask most folks, the pilot who flew too slow. Too careful. But that day, careful was the only reason any of us lived. The mission board was the first sign. Taped under plexiglass in thick black marker, one line was written like a eulogy: do not launch. Red Valley AO. Ambush. Total lockdown. The tag wasn't just anonymous. It carried a name. 3rd Battalion, 137th Airborne Infantry. I knew them. I'd flown them just 2 weeks prior, dropping them along that same ridgeline, where we joked about sandbags and bad instant coffee. Young guys. Old-timers. Tough, funny, hopeful. The kind who slapped your shoulder before jumping out and said, "You better come back for us." Now the reports pinned to the bottom of the mission board only repeated one word: overrun. Command had already drafted the casualty forecasts. Airspace was black. The F-35s were still 30 minutes out, and rotary wings were grounded until they could clear the ridge. But those soldiers didn't have 30 minutes. Inside the briefing tent, the air was stale. The old AC unit hummed like it was giving its last breath. Officers hunched over maps, tracing lines they didn't dare cross. I stood in the doorway, voice flat. If we wait, we're flying in for body bags. No one spoke. Not right away. Then Major Renner looked up at me, jaw set like stone. "You are not cleared to launch, Miles. That's final." I nodded. Didn't argue. Didn't plead. I just turned around and walked out. The hallway out of the ops tent felt colder than the morning air. Dust floated in beams of sun through the cracked windows, and each footstep echoed louder than the last. Tail number 27 Alpha was waiting on the line. My Black Hawk. She looked like she always did. Faded paint, a dent near the side door from a rough touch last winter, and the faint hum of readiness beneath the skin. I laid my hand on the nose, right where the skin was warmest. She felt steady. Specialist Monroe, my door gunner, leaned against a sandbag wall nearby, arms crossed. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "word is we're on hold, right?" "Correct," I replied. Behind him, my crew chief, Sergeant Corwin, stepped forward. Red Valley's boxed in. We all saw the drone feed. Mortars, PKMs, RPGs stacked in terraces like they're setting up a bonfire. I nodded. "But if we wait," I didn't finish the sentence. Monroe looked between us, reading what we hadn't said. "You're serious?" Corwin exhaled through his nose, slowly. "Orders are scrubbed," he repeated, then added. "But we're not, are we?" I strapped on my helmet. "We're not." The line crews heard fast. Eyes followed us without speaking. Some shook their heads. Some turned away. Everyone knew what a launch into Red Valley meant. It meant death. Inside the hangar, the radio net was alive. The airborne infantry were screaming out coordinates, ammo counts, last known positions. Then silence. A full squad's channel went dead. I stood in the shadow of my bird, listening. Back in the command tent, Renner barked one final time over the net, his voice sharp and final. "All rotary wings, hold position." That's an order. We wait for fixed-wing support. I keyed the mic. "Tower, this is 27 Alpha. We're launching." "Negative. That's an unauthorized launch." "Miles, stand down." I clicked the radio off. The walk back to the Black Hawk felt heavier this time, like the weight of 250 names pressed against my chest. Names that wouldn't make it another hour. So I made a choice. I climbed in. I flipped switches. I brought 27 Alpha to life. Because sometimes careful doesn't mean slow. Sometimes careful means you've memorized the kill zones by heart. Sometimes careful is the only thing keeping people alive. As the turbines spooled, a A storm of dust spiraled around us. Monroe locked in his M240, checking the belt like he already knew what was coming. Corwin slid into his seat behind me, hands moving through systems checks like it was any other mission. But this wasn't routine. This was suicide by every definition of doctrine. As we lifted off, the tower crackled one last time, sharp with urgency. 27 Alpha, you are not cleared. This is direct disobedience. Abort. I didn't respond. Instead, I glanced at the horizon, the ridgelines jagged as broken glass, and I pushed the throttle forward. Below us, the base shrank. Above us, the sky opened like a quiet dare. We flew straight toward hell. The valley closed fast. Every pilot in the region knew Red Valley was a death funnel. Narrow rock walls, no clean egress, and air currents that tore birds apart if you didn't compensate by instinct. But I'd flown this route a dozen times. At night, in rain, with engines choking on dust. I knew its twists the way some people knew lullabies. The first mortar flashed in the distance, bright, white, and angry. Then tracer fire. Green and red streaks clawed toward us like fingers trying to drag us down. RPGs cut lines through the air like knives. Monroe's voice cracked on the intercom. Contact left. Ridgeline. They're lighting up like Christmas. I rolled us hard starboard. The Black Hawk groaned. The G-force pinned us to our harnesses as dust howled through the cabin. We dropped, hard, down to 80 feet, then 60, then 40. Too low for mortars to adjust. Too low for machine gunners to track fast enough. I could feel the air folding around the rotors, fighting us every inch. But I knew what I was doing. I didn't need a drone to tell me where the ambush nests were. I'd mapped them in my head for months. And that's when I saw them. Pinned against a dried-up riverbed were the 3rd Battalion. Dust-covered, bleeding, yelling. Helmets down. Rifles flashing in erratic bursts. They were running out of ammo, space, and time. This is 27 Alpha, I called. Coming in hot. The ridge lit up with a fresh barrage. Monroe opened fire, his gun roaring across the valley, suppressing what he could. Brass rained to the floor. I picked the only landing spot I could find, barely the size of a trailer roof, half covered in shale. We hit skids nose high, tail exposed to fire. I didn't care. Get them in, I shouted. Corwin was already pulling the wounded in, some unconscious, some dragging each other with what strength they had left. Mortar blasts bracketed closer. The next one might be a direct hit. But we weren't leaving yet. We're full, Corwin yelled. There were more bodies on that floor than the Black Hawk was ever meant to carry. My warning panel lit up like a protest. Wait. Temp torque. I pushed collective. And we lifted. Not smoothly. Not cleanly. But we rose. And I turned us toward home. That should have been the end of it. But I turned back instead. Because we weren't done. The ride back should have felt like victory. It didn't. The cabin was chaos. Blood-slicked boots. Half-conscious paratroopers crammed shoulder to shoulder. The stench of cordite and scorched nylon thick in the air. Behind me, Corwin gave his report. 16 aboard. Birds at max stress. Hull's been tagged twice. We're lucky. But I wasn't listening to him. I was looking back. At the smoke still rising. At the flashes still lighting up the canyon floor. There were more down there. And I hadn't come for 16. I'd come for all of them. I threw the Hawk into a tight bank and turned back. The net lit up immediately. 27 Alpha, abort. Do not re-enter the valley. Repeat, do not. I cut the comms. No distractions. Not now. Monroe looked over at me, eyes wide. We going back in? We're not finished, I said. That was all. He didn't argue. He checked his weapon. Second ingress. This time, they knew I was coming. The RPGs were ready. The mortar teams had adjusted. The entire valley shifted its attention to the single helicopter that had dared humiliate their kill zone. The ridges spat fire. Rounds pinged off the fuselage. One spidered across the windshield in front of me, so close I felt the heat. Still, I dropped low, threaded between trees, ducked under power lines like a surgeon's scalpel. I wasn't flying a helicopter. I was threading a needle between bullets. The second group was already moving when we dropped. They'd seen what we did the first time and weren't wasting the chance. Wounded were dragged, carried, thrown aboard. Corwin shouted over the roar. We're past limit again. Doesn't matter, I said. We're not leaving them. A PKM team on the ridge finally got angle on our tail rotor. I saw them just as they swung to fire. Too late. Monroe was already tracking them. BRRRT. Gone. We lifted again. Skids slammed into a rock. Blades dipped within inches of the cliffside. Warning lights screamed. But so did my crew. We're clear. I pulled up. And once again, barely, bleeding, we made it out. I could have stopped there. I should have. But I didn't. Because more signals were still coming in from the ground. So I turned back. Again. Back at base, they were screaming into the comms now. Command, tower, even other pilots trying to raise me. I didn't answer. There wasn't time. The third run was going to be the worst. The valley wasn't surprised anymore. They had locked in on my rhythm, my angles, my habits. Every pass gave them more data to kill us with. This time, I came in lower, skimming the canyon wall so close I could see the scorch marks from earlier RPG strikes. The Blackhawk groaned beneath me, every vibration telling me we were pushing past tolerance. Corwin muttered behind me, "This bird's gonna tear itself apart." He wasn't wrong. But I whispered back, "Not yet." The LZ was hotter than ever. Mortars landed within meters. One blast sent a shockwave that rattled the entire fuselage. Shrapnel punched through the side panel. One fragment tore across a soldier's leg as he climbed aboard. He screamed. Corwin grabbed him, slapped on a tourniquet mid-pull, and shoved him deeper into the cabin. Paratroopers were shoving each other now, desperate not to be left behind. There was no space, no air, just raw survival. "That's it. We're full," Monroe yelled, still firing out the door. I could barely hear over the alarms. Over torque, engine heat, hydraulic pressure redlining. But I flew. Because if I didn't, that bird became a coffin for everyone inside. We clawed skyward again, this time with so much weight the skids scraped rock on liftoff. The nose dipped hard. A tree branch slapped the undercarriage. Tracer rounds chased us like vengeful ghosts. We climbed. Slowly. Agonizingly. A round punched through the tail. Another shattered glass near Monroe. He flinched, but didn't stop firing. I kept my hands locked on the cyclic, sweat blinding my vision, every muscle in my arms screaming. Then, somehow, we cleared the ridge. The bird was flying ragged, like a drunk boxer on the 12th round. But we were up. And out. Again. The silence in the cabin was different this time. No cheering. No sighs of relief. Just eyes. Wide, stunned eyes. Paratroopers looking at me like I was something between a myth and a hallucination. And I wasn't done. Because there were still boots on the ground. And one Blackhawk left that could bring them home. I didn't even say it out loud this time. I just banked the bird again. A shallow arc toward the ridgeline. Toward the smoke. Toward the chaos. Corwin didn't argue. Monroe just reloaded. We were past questions. Past hesitation. We were in it. The fourth run began. The damage was worse now. The Blackhawk had more holes than panels. Warning lights that had blinked red now glowed steady. The helicopter wasn't warning me anymore. It was begging. But there were still men down there. And this time, I saw something else. Enemy fighters advancing across the flank, weaving through brush, closing in for the final kill. Not today. Monroe opened up before I said a word. His fire cut across the slope, tearing through brush, scattering the line. For a heartbeat, the paratroopers on the ground surged forward, scrambling through smoke and debris toward us. The skids hit harder than before. Unstable ground. One wheel dipped in a crevice, tilting us left. I slammed the cyclic right. Skids groaned. The bird rocked. But we stayed upright. "Let's go? Let's go?" Corwin shouted, his voice hoarse. The last stick of soldiers ran like the ground was on fire. Because it was. Mortars found our position again. One struck less than 10 meters away. Dust blinded the whole left side. I flew half blind, relying on instruments and gut instinct. Bodies poured into the cabin. Wounded. Screaming. Some half-dragged, some crawling. One soldier collapsed in the doorway, and for a second, I thought he wasn't going to make it. Corwin jumped out, hooked his vest, and hauled him inside. Another overload. Another red line. "You good?" I called back. His voice came after a pause. "We're packed. Like canned beans. But yeah, we're good." I didn't hesitate. Pulled power. Lifted. The valley answered with its last card. A surface-to-air missile-lock tone screamed in my headset. Everything froze in that second. I looked at my altitude. No maneuvering room. Weight. Too much. Speed. Not enough. "Flare," Monroe shouted. Corwin slapped the switch. Magnesium bursts flew behind us, glowing white-hot. Then the missile launched. I saw it. A long, sharp streak of smoke. racing through the flares, hunting heat. Come on, come on. I dropped altitude hard, pitched nose down, pulled a tight banking turn I had no right to attempt in that condition. The missile curved, dipped, clipped a flare, and detonated just behind us. The shockwave slammed us forward. One paratrooper fell sideways, knocking two more with him. Equipment scattered. Screams filled the cabin. But we were still flying. Battered, bruised, but flying. I held the bird level, arms numb, helmet soaked with sweat. The valley receded behind us. And I realized every single one of them was aboard. All of them. We did it. We'd done the impossible. The mountains fell behind us, inch by aching inch. The smell of gunpowder lingered in the cabin like a second skin. Sweat dripped off helmets. Medics among the paratroopers worked with what little they had. Tourniquets fashioned from slings, morphine syrettes passed down the line. Nobody said a word. They didn't need to. Every one of them knew how close it had been. And so did I. Base came into view like a mirage. FOB Elias, a slab of concrete and steel, antennae glinting in the sun, medical crews already racing toward the landing pad. My fingers trembled on the controls. I coaxed the Black Hawk in low and slow. Every warning panel still screamed. Hydraulic pressure unstable. Engine temp critical. Rotor torque exceeded. I ignored them. Just a little further. 27 Alpha. The tower called. Voice different now. Soft. Measured. You are clear. Pad is yours. Bring them home. Corwin exhaled into the intercom. Monroe whispered, Jesus. I didn't say a word. I just landed. The skids kissed the pad. The rotors spun down, one blade wobbling slightly from the strain. For a second, no one moved. Then the doors opened, and the paratroopers poured out. Not in formation. Not in silence. They staggered, limped, crawled, and collapsed. Some clutched rifles. Others leaned on strangers. A few dropped straight into the arms of waiting medics. The ramp erupted with noise, shouts for litters, stretcher teams barking orders, officers checking head counts, trying to make sense of what had just arrived. And then, something I didn't expect. The line crew, mechanics, radio techs, cooks, even a few clerks, stood at the edge of the pad. They weren't working. They weren't moving. They were saluting. One by one. Hands raised, slowly, silently. It wasn't a ceremony. It wasn't for show. It was for us. And I felt my throat tighten. I powered the bird down. Unstrapped my harness. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Helmet off. Boots on the ground. I stood for the first time in hours. Sergeant Corwin was beside me, silent, his uniform black with grease and dust. He didn't speak. Didn't need to. He just stood there, shoulders squared, watching as every last soldier disappeared into the medical tents. Every single one. They say the Army doesn't forget. That night, they proved it. The chow hall was packed. I didn't expect to go. I wasn't hungry, just exhausted. But Corwin dragged me anyway. Said I needed to see it. And when I walked in, the noise stopped. Just for a second. Just long enough for everyone to look. Then, one of the paratroopers stood. Then another. And another. Until the whole damn 3rd Battalion was on their feet. No words. No cheers. Just a wall of men standing in silence, giving me what they could. Their respect. But respect isn't always how the Army writes its reports. The next morning, I was called into the CO's office. He looked like he hadn't slept. On his desk were the incident reports, my flight logs, and a file folder already open with a reprimand. Disobeyed direct orders. Endangered personnel and equipment. Deviated from operational protocol. He didn't speak right away. Just looked at me. Finally, he said, "You understand what you did, Lieutenant?" I nodded. "Yes, sir. You disobeyed a direct order." "I did. You risked your crew, your bird, your life." I said nothing. Then he leaned back, sighed, and added quietly, "And you brought every damn one of them home." He didn't tear the reprimand in half. Didn't burn it in some righteous speech. He just signed it, slid it across the desk, and said, "This will stay in your file." I took it. Didn't flinch. Because I had something else the file didn't show, 250 witnesses who knew the truth. Over the next few days, things shifted. Quietly. Other pilots came to find me. Apaches. Medevac crews. Old Warren officers with grizzled faces and soft voices. They didn't ask about medals or reprimands. They asked about flight paths, RPM underload, terrain masking through the canyon. They wanted to know how. And I told them. Not with bravado. Not with pride. Just precision. The training books changed months later. Slowly. Subtly. Minimum altitudes in hot zones. Adjusted. Rotorcraft suppression methods. Rewritten. Even the scenario in flight school simulators changed. They called it Red Valley Protocol. But the instructors just called it Mitchell's Law. I didn't care what name they gave it. All I cared about was that the next pilot, facing the same odds, might have more than instinct to rely on. Awards came, eventually. The kind with careful wording and vague phrases like extraordinary valor in support of ground forces. They handed me a commendation at a ceremony I didn't attend. Corwin picked it up for me. Said I'd rather keep working than smile for a photographer. He wasn't wrong. The reprimand stayed in my file, too. One page stapled forever to my name. But I learned something. In the right company, the page doesn't matter. Because word travels faster than paperwork in the Army. Pilots started greeting me differently. A nod. A shoulder clap. A quiet hell of a thing you did. And the 3rd Battalion? They never forgot. Every time I passed their lines, some soldier would glance up. Some would say nothing, just give a half salute, or tap the fuselage of my Black Hawk as they walked by. It wasn't official. It wasn't in the books. But it meant more than anything pinned to a ribbon bar. I saw it in their eyes, the ones who'd been there. Who knew just how thin the line between life and death had gotten that day. And who knew who flew the one bird that crossed that line 4 times. One afternoon, the battalion commander caught up with me on the flight line. He stood there for a moment, watching my crew perform a maintenance check. Then he turned to me, face set. "I told you not to launch," he said. I didn't answer. "I saw risk," he continued. "You saw the math." He looked down, then back up. "I was wrong. That was all. Not forgiveness. Not praise. Just truth. And in this job, truth meant something." That night, I sat alone in the hangar, staring at tail number 27 Alpha. Ran a hand along the battered fuselage, where fresh paint hadn't yet covered the shrapnel dings. The Black Hawk didn't speak, but it remembered. Every mile, every hit, every run. It had flown into hell with me, and come back with 250 souls. Sometimes, people ask me if I felt brave that day. The truth? No. I felt tired, scared, angry, but not brave. Bravery isn't what pushes your hands forward on a cyclic when the windshield's cracked and the alarms won't stop screaming. It's something quieter. It's memory. It's math. It's knowing the ridge lines by heart, the crosswinds by feel, the ambush alleys like scars on your own skin. It's discipline so drilled into your soul that, when the call comes and nobody else moves, you just do. Because someone has to. Because they're still alive down there, and if you wait, they won't be. I don't hang medals on my wall. I don't quote doctrine or argue tactics. But sometimes, I walk the flight line early in the morning. Boots crunching on gravel. Steam rising from the tarmac. The smell of jet fuel just beginning to wake up the sky. And I see them. Soldiers from the 3rd Battalion. Some still new. Some grizzled and scarred. They nod. Sometimes they salute. Other times, they just rest a hand on the Black Hawk's nose as they pass. Silent. Reverent. Like they're touching a monument. They don't need to say anything. They know. That day in the valley wasn't about orders or awards or punishment. It wasn't about defiance. It was about 250 paratroopers who were supposed to die, and one pilot who decided she wasn't going to let that happen. Not on her watch. Not in her valley. My name is Lieutenant Eva Callahan. I fly careful. I fly low. And when the valley closes its jaws around our boys, I fly through. Because that's what it means to be careful. And that's how you bring them home. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.